Hi, I'm Professor Scott Sampson, and I've been asked to put together this video about the Malawi's pizza catering case, and also to introduce you a little bit more to PCN analysis. So hopefully you had a chance to read the case. That's certainly important before you watch this video. And in the case, there's actually discussion of various players in this particular business here, the Malawi's Pizza Catering, one of which is Kent Beck. Kent is the owner at the time of the case. He's the owner of Malawi's Pizza. There's also a video where we have an interview with Kent Beck, and hopefully you had a chance to watch that video as well. That would be helpful in terms of understanding kind of where Malawi's is coming from in terms of their strategy and concept. So if you haven't watched that video, you might want to pause and go watch that or proceed. In the video, Kent talked about kind of the three pillars of the Malawi concept. One of which was the healthy menu, which in that video he talked about they wanted to have fresh ingredients and they want to have good control over what goes into what they produce at Malawi's Pizza. And one of the ways that he accomplished that is through insourcing. So they actually brought in-house things like making their own sauces instead of just buying sauces from some supplier. And that allowed them, again, to control more of the ingredients and the flavors and so forth. Another pillar that he talked about in the video is the social giving. And social giving really was kind of a big part of their marketing strategy here, and talking about how for every meal you would purchase, they would donate a meal to a person in Malawi and Africa. The third pillar that Kent Beck talked about in the video was this idea of the fast casual service. Now this is kind of an emerging restaurant operating paradigm, and Malawi's, I think, did a fantastic job of using fast casual as kind of a way to fit well within the restaurant market. So what is this fast casual? That's what we're going to focus on today. If you think about it, there's actually fast food such as Little Caesars. That's super fast. You go into Little Caesars and it's hot and ready, and 5 minutes later you're walking out with a large pepperoni pizza. On the other extreme, we have kind of slow service, which is what we would sometimes call a full service restaurant. And at slow service, they take your order, they might customize your order, you wait for them to prepare the food, and potentially in a full service restaurant, you could easily spend an hour or more in the restaurant with the dining experience. So fast casual is kind of in between. That's where Malawi's fit. So it's faster than full service dining, but not as fast as like the fast food. And so they're trying to have a little bit slower experience. In fact, in the case it talked about this is the idea that a typical customer might be there perhaps 20, 22 minutes in the restaurant. All right, so we're going to now visualize a service operation. So this case and this particular part of the course is about service operations, and that's my area. I love service operations. So we're going to use a tool called PCN Analysis to kind of visualize and think about how a service operation works. So we have in PCN Analysis this thing called a process entity. A process entity is some entity, it could be an individual, an organization, and so forth, that participates in a production process. So, for example, it could be employees, it could be customers, it could be things such as suppliers could be a process entity, or maybe even regulators, like this is the health department representative, for example. Okay, so there's a lot of different types of process entities. This particular part of a PCN diagram is a process entity that represents a process domain. So it looks like a building, but it's not. It actually has some symbolic meaning that we'll talk about in a few minutes. So a process domain contains all of the processes that are directly performed, directed, controlled by an entity. So let me illustrate this with an example. We're going to use a pizza example, but it's not Malawi's yet. We'll come back to Malawi's a little bit later. But the example that I'm going to give is a restaurant called the Brick Oven. And it's actually more of a full-service restaurant. So we'll start with a full-service example before we move to the Malawi's catering example. So at the Brick Oven, they have a number of steps in the process. One of those was at some point developing the recipes. So they had their chefs or whomever decide, okay, what are the recipes, what are we going to offer here? From that, they were able to identify ingredients that will have to go into these food items. And they can then negotiate a supply contract to get the ingredients they need in order to produce this particular type of food offering. Also, they're able to, from the ingredients, they can forecast their supply needs. So identify what types of ingredients and the quantities they'll need. They can then place some orders after they have the contract. They can order perhaps online, and the supplier will then deliver the supplies. So Cisco is an example of a food service supplier. They then, at the restaurant, at the brick oven, they have a stock room where they maintain their supplies, their inventories. And then based on how they maintain that, they would then forecast what the needs are for replenishment. At the front end of things, they take the order from customers, they cook their pizza in the back office, what they call the back office operation, which is in the kitchen area. Of course, to cook the pizzas, they would have had to preheat the ovens. And then ultimately, and they develop the recipes, maintain the supplies, then ultimately they would like to serve the pizza to the customers, and it's wonderful. So this is a process here, and this process is a flow chart, and hopefully you've had the chance to see flow chart to use them in some other course. A flow chart has the little boxes that represent process steps, and then the arrows represent precedence relationships. So for example, you cannot cook the pizza without preheating the oven. You can't order the supplies until you forecast the supply needs and so forth. So it's a flow chart. Now, I want to talk about how this fits within our within this process domain of the restaurant. So there are in fact 3 regions of a process domain. At the outer edges of the process domain, we have the region of direct interaction. Direct interaction is person-to-person interaction. It's interpersonal. For example, negotiating the supply contract, it's person-to-person, or taking the order. A little bit closer in, we have the region of surrogate interaction. Surrogate interaction is not person-to-person interaction, but it's person-to-entity interaction. It could be, for example, acting on a technology, such as ordering the supplies online. Or it could be something like cooking the pizza. That's not cooking the customer, it's cooking the customer's order. So that is acting on customer information. So that's surrogate interaction. And finally, in the center of the process domain, we have the region of independent processing. Those are the steps that are directly performed and controlled by that entity without having to interact with some other entity. So they're non-interactive. Things like developing recipes, identifying ingredients, and so forth are in the region of independent processing. Now, if we think about this, what if the developing recipes was outsourced? So there are firms that do this that will help you, nutritional firms or such, that will help you develop your recipes. If they outsource developing recipes, it would not be in the region of independent processing, but in fact it would be in that supplier's region, perhaps, of surrogate interaction. All right, so we have these 3 regions of a process domain: direct interaction, surrogate interaction, and independent processing. Now let me talk a little bit about this triangle at the top of the PCN diagram. Again, it looks kind of like a building, but it's not. It has really nothing to do with physical facilities here, per se. But this triangle at the top represents what is important, which is process control. And it symbolically reminds us that in the region of independent processing, the process entity has maximum control. They can control when, how, and what types of things they do in a particular process. But as you move to the regions of surrogate interaction and direct interaction, the entity has to give up some of that control because they're now interacting with another entity. They have to share some of that control. So as a result, the entity has less control over those aspects of the process. All right, so in summary, we have direct interaction, person-to-person interaction. We have surrogate interaction, person to resource. It could be acting on information or technologies and so forth. And we have independent processing, where we're doing things based on resources that we may have received from some other entity, a customer or a supplier, but we're acting on them ourselves and we own and control those resources. All right, so here we have our PCN diagram for the brick oven. Now, what do you suppose is off here to the left? Over to the left here, we have another process entity, which would be the supplier, and they have a process domain. And they're doing all kinds of things themselves. They are, producing items, sourcing things, assembling things, filling orders, and so forth. Off to the right, we have another process domain. As you can imagine, it's the customer's process domain. And the customer has all types of activities that they're acting, some doing independently, some in interaction with the brick oven, and so forth. Wouldn't it be great if we could look into the customer's process domain? Well, thanks to the magic of PowerPoint, we can. So here we go. Hold on. There we are. Whoa, look at that. The customer independently is developing an appetite. They come to the restaurant, and in surrogate interaction, they wait to be seated. They just sit down in the waiting room, which is the restaurant's facility. Then, at this particular restaurant, they are seated by one of the employees who takes them to an available seat. The customer reviews the menu, surrogate interaction. They create the order interactively. Again, full service restaurant, it's very interactive here. The customer then waits for the pizza. Meanwhile, the restaurant cooks the pizza, and they had to prepare the ovens and so forth, as we saw before. They get the pizza eventually. The employee prepares the check. They present the check to the customer pays, and then returns home. So here we have two process domains that are interacting with each other. So on the left, we have the activities that are in the provider's process domain. On the right, we have steps that are in the customer's process domain. And at the intersection of these, we have these very important steps that are what we call co-production. They are co-productive in the sense that the provider and the customer are working together in order to produce the value and produce this offering here. And you know, co-production is really the essence of service operations. A key thing that we study in studying service operations is how co-production impacts things such as process efficiency, process quality, and so forth. All right, so let's move on to the Malawi's pizza catering case. And what we're going to do is create a PCN diagram based on information from the case. So again, I expect that you will have already read the case, that you're kind of familiar with this process. So it'll make a lot more sense if you've read the case, of course. So here we go. In the case, there was this issue about the restaurant and the catering. Now, I'm going to focus on the catering, but I want to do a quick comparison of these two things here, the restaurant versus the catering. The restaurant, of course, is a big fixed location, and what that means is the customers have to go to the restaurant doesn't go to the customers. Whereas for catering, it varies. They'll actually bring their portable oven to specific locations. The restaurant is small groups, maybe anywhere between 1, 2, or up to maybe a dozen people. Whereas with the catering, it's very large groups, hundreds, as the case points out, might be at one particular catering gig. The restaurant has relatively stable demand. What that means is that, they can predict. It varies throughout the week, but week to week, it's probably pretty stable demand. Whereas for the catering, it's very seasonal, meaning that sometimes of the year they would have massive amounts of demand, even more demand than they can handle. And other times of the year, as an example, in the wintertime, here in Utah where it snows, they might not use that portable outdoor oven very much. Random arrivals, the customers just arrive whenever they arrive to the restaurant. They don't give any forewarning, whereas for the catering, they always schedule in advance, as we'll talk about in a few minutes. The pizza is made at the time of demand, so in the restaurant, they have this big, beautiful brick oven there that they use, and they have all the ingredients there, so they actually assemble it at the time and cook it at the time of demand. Whereas for the catering, as the case points out, they actually make it earlier in the day. They assemble the pizzas and what they call par cook them earlier in the day so that when they have the actual catering gig, it can be a lot more efficient and quick delivery. All right, so our mission here with PCN Analysis is to document a service operation, which another way we could say that is to document a co-productive operation, Malawi's pizza in this case. To identify sources of value in the operation, so identify where the operation provides value to the provider or to the customer. Identify process improvement opportunities, so some things that might stand improvement here. It could be things like maybe we could stand some better efficiency, or maybe better interactions, or maybe better value, or so forth. There's a lot of things we might look at. We're going to explore some improvement alternatives. So we're going to think about those kind of in a design sense before they would actually be implemented. And then finally, what we like to be able to do is to communicate the improvement to employees and managers and so forth so that it could actually be implemented. So let's go through some of that. This mission is possible due to the use of PCN Analysis. So that's the tool we're going to use today. So there are 4 basic steps this is the basic versions of PCN Analysis. They are: first, identify the system entities and roles. Second, document key processes, assess the value proposition, and finally, generate strategic improvement alternatives. So let's identify the system entities and roles. Now this was actually done in the case. I believe it was Exhibit 2. And in Malawi's we have entities. We have one was called the principal individual. In this case, it might be a wedding. So this is a picture of Steve Martin from the movie Father of the Bride. And he was the principal individual because he was the one that was commissioning this particular event, which was a wedding type of reception. So he hired somebody. In this case, the guy's name in Father of the Bride was Frank. Again, if you haven't seen this movie, it is so funny. But he hires Frank, who's Martin Short, and he is the event planner. And he's the one that's actually going to make all the arrangements on behalf of Steve Martin. There's the caterer. Now, in the movie, I don't think it was Malawi's Pizza, but we're going to consider the caterer was Malawi's Pizza in this case, the catering. And there's interactions there between the event planner and the caterer and so forth. We have the venue host. It's where the event will take place. It could be a reception center or a city park or something like that. There is the event attendees, those that participate in the event, and they would have perhaps interactions with the various entities as well. So we have these types of entities participating in the process. All right, let's document a process here. We're going to use a PCN diagram again. We have, again, process entities, process domain, and the process regions. Let's go back to our entity diagram here. So there's a lot of entities. There's 5 entities here that we potentially could consider. We're going to focus on the interactions between the caterer and the event planner here. And we could actually look at more than this, but for our first little PCN diagram of Malawi's Pizza, we're just going to look at these 2 entities. So here's a structure of the PCN diagram. It's actually 2 diagrams kind of placed next to each other. On the left, we have the provider, which is, of course, Malawi's Pizza. On the right, we have the customer, which is, in this case, going to be the event planner representing the principal individual. All right, so let's look at some of the steps. These were discussed in the case. So the event planner needs catering in order to meet a client's need. Explore some alternatives. Calls Malawi's. Now, I put that in surrogate interaction because they are, having to look up the phone number and find the information and make the call here. But then when we actually interact over the phone, that would be direct interaction. So they actually, the Malawi's employee asks about the event date type and how many are going to attend. The event planner provides that information. They then check the schedule at Malawi. So I'm using the right and left sides of the direct interaction region to kind of indicate who's kind of leading that particular part of the direct interaction. They check the available date. Is it available? Well, if not, unfortunately, they have to explore other alternatives. If it is available, they would then arrange a meeting. The customer has to wait for this meeting because it might be a week or 2 later. At the meeting, so this is, again, sometime later, they would actually discuss the menu options and this wonderful opportunity to taste test. Now, I've actually done this. It is fantastic because you're going to try their different pizzas and sample all these things and make decisions about that. From that, then, the employee would calculate the quantity and based on that would determine the price and then communicate that price to the client. The client would then determine if the price is acceptable. If not, sadly, they'll have to find other alternatives. If it is acceptable, then they will book the catering engagement. And as the case talked about this, they'll then record it in the catering book. So this is the process of planning an event. Let's look at another piece for another example. Let's look at the process of actually food preparation and delivery. So this is the day of the event, which is, of course, sometime after the planning of the event. So the day of, or it could be even the evening before, but usually it's the day of sometimes, they would assemble the pizzas in the Malawi's facility. They would then par cook them, which means they cook them kind of most of the way so they're kind of ready to go, so they can have quicker cooking at the time in the brick oven. They load the food and the supplies into the trailer. And of course, they have to independently maintain the trailer. Now, why am I putting these steps in surrogate interaction? Because in all of these steps, they're interacting with the customer's information. This is all made to order. So it's interacting with the customer's order. All right, so they maintain the oven, they load the trailer, they drive to the venue. They then determine a parking plan. Is there an obvious place to park the trailer? If not, if there is, they would park the trailer. If there's not, they may have to discuss alternate parking locations with either the venue host or it might be discussing that with the event planner. Then they unload the trailer and they move on. So this is a continuation of the diagram. So the A points to a continuation of another page of the diagram. They then set up their portable kitchen. Is there a serving area? So they need to have a place to put the pizzas where they'll serve them to the guests. If that's obvious, then they can set that up. If not, again, they may have to talk to the event planner and determine the appropriate place to set up the serving area. Then they would wait for the start of the event. So they want to do this, of course, a little bit in advance of the event. The event starts. Then they heat the pizzas in the brick oven. So again, the brick oven, it's interesting. They're not actually cooking them in the brick oven. That would take too long. They're just kind of reheating them. So it's kind of as much as anything kind of for effect there. They then take the pizzas to the serving area and give it to the customers. Now here I'm representing the customers being the event attendees. They then eat the pizza. Meanwhile, the Malawi's people are kind of monitoring consumption. And sometimes people might come up and say, hey, can we get another pepperoni pizza or another Hawaiian pizza or whatever? In which case, they would heat more pizzas and prepare whatever the customers might request and take them to the serving area. So that's the process that takes place at the day of the event. Now, there's another aspect of this, which is cleanup. I'll go through this quickly. But afterwards, they clean up the oven, load the trailer, determine the actual number of pizzas. They prepare an invoice because, again, they only charge for what the people actually consume. They present the invoice. Then the customer provides the payment, and the employees then return to the store and unload the trailer. And in part of this, one of the things the case points out is that the customer is responsible for their own cleanup. Malawi does not clean up the tables and things, which of course that would probably make sense because they may go on for hours before they'd actually wind up cleaning up their event. All right, that's our PCN diagram. Let's assess the value proposition. In my courses, I actually go through this in a lot of detail, but for today, we're going to do this very, very simple form of this. Value is absolutely essential in service operations. Actually, in any operation, value is essentially important. Why is it so important? It is the basis of customer satisfaction. If we want our customers to be happy and satisfied, we need to provide value. It's also the basis of customer loyalty. If we want our customers to keep coming back and to refer us to others, we need to provide value. And it's also the basis of firm profitability because customer satisfaction and loyalty are foundations of profitability. So if we want to be profitable, we have to have value, not just for customers, but also for employees, for regulators, for stockholders, and managers, and so forth. So again, in my courses, we talk about this in a lot of detail. I'm going to kind of go through this very quickly today in this intro. So let's look at part of our process. This is the planning part of the process. Now, we're going to depict value here. First, there's two types of value we'll consider. One is monetary value, which we flag in the diagram with a little dollar sign. The other is psychological value, which is those points in the process where we are creating happiness. And that's what we represent in the PCN diagram with a little smiley face. So where do we make the customer happy in this process? Well, I'll tell you this. The monetary value first is the booking the catering engagement. When they book that engagement, that's going to lead to then financial gains for the organization, for the provider. So the psychological value, one place I see psychological value is booking the engagement as well. It's like, whoosh, we got that out of the way. It's booked and we're ready to go with that aspect of the particular event. Another one that I see as being valuable, providing value to customers, is this area of taste testing and discussing the options. It's actually kind of exciting to look at all the different types of things they offer. Oh, I would tell you this, their dessert pizzas, oh man, got to taste test those things. They are fantastic. So these are a couple points in the process where the customers either gain satisfactions or the firm provides monetary opportunities here. And there are some aspects called value potential and value realization that I cover in my courses that I'm not going to go into here. Now, we also have, sadly, negative value, which we call costs. And so we might have things that are costing us as a firm in financial ways, or there might be psychological cost to this as well. So a way that we might depict these, and typically in actual analysis, we'd actually do interviews and gather data on this. So I'm just telling you kind of some things that might come out of that. So one of the places we have costs is these discussing menu options and giving away the free pizza and the taste test. You know, that's labor intensive and it's going to take some expense there to provide that. In terms of psychological costs, I think one of these is if there's no data available, that's going to be a big psychological cost. The customer's not going to be happy. There's going to be some dissatisfaction because of that. Another area might be the waiting, having to wait for the day of the event. or I mean not for the event, for the day of the meeting, that might be a cost because maybe because of scheduling, it might take a little while to work that in. So these are just some examples of the ways that we might depict value in terms of benefits and in terms of costs. All right, so let's say we've done that and we've studied this process. What we want to do next is identify an opportunity to improve value or improve quality or efficiency or so forth. There's a number of things we might improve. So one might be economies of scale. We might say, oh, we have these ovens, they cost us money, we want to get more value out of these things, meaning we want to have them be used across more customer opportunities, customer service opportunities. Or we might say we want to scale, we want to have the ability to do larger events. We might have we might want to do increased customization, be able to tailor more to the specific needs of individual customers in terms of types of pizzas or dietary restrictions or so forth. Maybe improved efficiency. Maybe this is a problem. Maybe Malawi's wants to improve the cost in which they can lower the cost in which they can deliver their offerings. Scalability, I've already kind of talked about that a little bit, but maybe they want to be able to scale up for the busy times of the years and handle even larger events. Do they have the ability to scale this up? Improving consistency or quality, and of course value is kind of the bottom line on all of this because all of these contribute to value in one way or another, or can detract if they're not designed well. So we want to identify some improvement opportunities so that we can help Malawi's be more successful and help the customers be happier. All right, so back to our diagram. This is going to look at the preparation and delivery part of the process. And I'm going to focus in this particular exploration of improvement opportunities on one step. So let's imagine the step we wanted to focus on is assembling pizzas. Then maybe we're thinking to ourselves, oh, this step is going okay, but there's some problems. Maybe it's not as efficient as it is, or maybe it's not meeting customer needs as well as it could, or so forth. So let me pull that step out and say, what happens if we move it? Now, initially, I need to remind us, it's in surrogate interaction. That means we are assembling pizzas based on a customer order, which is good, except for it requires that we cannot assemble the pizzas until after we have the customer order. An alternative would be to assemble the pizzas beforehand. Perhaps independently of customers, we could do it at a centralized location, we could mass produce these things, almost like a factory here, and that could provide us some benefits, or maybe some problems. Another alternative might be to assemble the pizzas in direct interaction. This would mean that the customer and the provider are getting together in synchronous interaction, talking about how to assemble the pizzas. And this actually happens. For example, there are restaurants like Pizza Rev and others where you actually, as a customer, would go into the restaurant, talk to the employees about how you want it assembled. You could even say things like, oh, I want my pepperonis around the perimeter of the pizza. I don't want them in the middle. I'd like to have in the middle to have some vegetables, and however you want to have it. It can be even more customized there. So that's another alternative, is to assemble the pizzas in direct interaction. Another alternative, as you can imagine, might be for the customer to assemble the pizzas in their region of surrogate interaction. So that would be the customer assembling pizzas using resources that are provided and owned by the provider. So an example of that, now I realize this is not pizza, this is actually a Mongolian barbecue, but I love Mongolian barbecue because I have tremendous control over the process. You assemble the food in their stations there in the restaurant, and then they will cook it for you. And so I have much more control in that part of the process than if I just order food to be delivered to me. So that's surrogate interaction in the customer's region of surrogate interaction. Finally, the customer could assemble the pizza in their own region of independent processing. That means they have control over all the resources that go into that. Maybe they purchase these resources from a supplier. An example of this would be these things called the mini Murphs. So Papa Murphy's, their pizza restaurant chain, they actually have or have had this thing called a mini Murph. It's a kit. And it actually comes with the ingredients and little packets and so forth that you can then assemble your own pizza in your home. So that would be an example of a customer assembling a pizza in their region of independent processing. All right, so we have these 5 different alternatives. Now let's think about this. Which of these 5 is the best alternative? Well, we can't really answer that until we understand what our objective is. So which of these would be best? So let's say, for example, we were focusing on economies of scale. So imagine that our equipment was very expensive, or our expertise was very difficult to acquire. So we want to spread that over a lot of production. Well, we're going to get the best economies of scale over here in the provider's region of independent processing. So if we move into the provider's region, we get better economies of scale. What about if our objective is to improve customization? So we want to customize pizzas. Customers have very specific dietary needs. They want pizzas that, they can't have this. They want to have more in this. They may even want to have unusual things. They may want to put bananas on their pizza. Who knows? Actually, I have tried lettuce on a pizza, and believe it or not lettuce, but spinach. Spinach is actually really good, but I think I have tried lettuce as well, and it was surprisingly tasty. But anyway, they may have unusual things they want to put on their pizza, maybe even things that are not the best for you. I don't know what it would be, like those little donut ball things or something like that. But anyway, if we want to have ultimate customization, we really probably need to move the step towards the customer's regions of independent processing or maybe even surrogate interaction. The customer has more control there, so we're more able to customize the offering to their liking. What if we want to improve efficiency? Okay, so we want to lower the cost structure of this. Well, that's kind of interesting because there's actually a few ways to do that. The region of direct interaction, I will tell you this, is not the region of the most efficiency there. That can be very inefficient having to deal with all that interaction. But if we move either to independent processing in the provider or the customer's process domains, we can have increased efficiency. In the provider's case, they have, again, tremendous control over the process and they can really manage costs well. For the customer, if they own all their ingredients, so for example, if I own the ingredients to make a pizza, I don't have to go anywhere. It's super efficient, especially if I have a pre-prepared, like a frozen pizza. You throw that thing in the oven or microwave or whatever, and minutes later you have your pizza. So that's efficient as well. So again, we're seeing this idea that moving out of direct interaction improves efficiency, which might lead us to wonder, why would we ever want to be in direct interaction? Well, the point of this is there are trade-offs. Sometimes we need a balance. We don't just have one objective, we have multiple objectives. So for example, if we need economies of scale and customization at the same time, maybe we need to do that process step in the region of direct interaction. All right, so this is a little bit of the way that we would explore alternatives here. In my course, we actually have a name for this. We call this strategic process positioning. But it's really a way that we can use, tool we can use in a way that we can explore alternatives and look at how they will impact different operating objectives. All right, let's summarize here. So I've tried to introduce you to the service operations. The idea of a service operation is an operation that involves interaction between different entities, providers, customers, suppliers, and so forth, and interactive. We also call this co-production. That's kind of the magic word. You'll see if you wind up taking my course in my customer relationship management course, I love this word, co-production. It just brings joy to my heart to think about this idea of working with interactive offerings here. Service designs, we design the offering. We might optimize things like economies of scale, customization, efficiency, and so forth. Again, trying to lead to greater value. We improve processes through process repositioning. So we move process steps around. We basically change roles in the relationships within the process to improve whatever our objectives are, leading to greater value. Malawi's pizza catering certainly can improve. So I think that's part of your homework assignment for this case. Is you might think about some ways that you can improve the operation, ways where it might have some inefficiencies or can improve economies of scale or so forth. The fact is that all service operations can improve. 80% of our economy is service operations. It's just amazing how important services are to our economies, to advanced economies today. And what we've seen is, and research has shown this, is that they really lag behind manufacturing in terms of issues like productivity and quality and customer perceptions and so forth. So there's a lot of opportunities in improving service operations. Now, what if you want to know more about this, about service operations and how we can improve these things? I mentioned a little bit earlier about my course, which is Supply Chain 419 Customer Relationship Management. And I realize that name sometimes has some marketing implications, but my course is certainly a operations supply chain course. It is a supply chain elective. It's offered winter semester, and it's our way that we can help change the world. And I hope to see some of you there. If you have any questions about the course or about any of these things, feel free to contact me. I'm Professor Scott Sampson. Take care.